Hey everybody, good morning. It's Rob Sesternino back here with an update of the Big Brother live feeds from overnight on July 15th, 2016, on a week after we have a newly crowned HOH, where it's Paulie for the second time as the HOH, following the eviction of Bronte from Thursday night. We've got a lot to do, and we got our live feed correspondents here for you, and I can't wait for you to hear what they have to say. Joining me this morning, it's Alex Kidwell and Taryn Armstrong. How are you guys this morning?
Doing great. You know, I called you a dictator. I've called you a dictator in the past, but I feel especially so now because for some reason I just feel like I'm doing this for the second time, and it's just like it's more work.
Yes, just like Paulie's HOH for the second time. So, yes,
very
thank
much
you.
so.
Thank you. I do appreciate you guys joining this dictatorship and not overthrowing it and commenting on whether or not I smell like manure.
Yeah, I hope we'll be very vocal on this show, much like Paulie has been all season.
Good.
Hey.
Yeah.
Good.
And don't worry, what happened in Chicago will stay in Chicago, Rob, as far as your gas goes.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I also thought that manure, I always thought it was a nice word. It's like two words, ma and newer. Both are good words. Put them together. And so, no, we're not here to talk about Seinfeld or Mr. Robot here today, but we're ready to talk about the action overnight. And it was a pretty busy Thursday night into Friday. I was very concerned last night where I was really down on the episode because I felt like that, boy, it's going to be so boring, so vanilla potentially with a Paulie HOH. I thought that all the players would be holding their cards very close to the vest now that Frank is safe. And boy, that was not really what ended up happening in practice, and cards all over the place. And so let's get into some of the action from overnight. Again, if you don't want to be spoiled about potential nominations and any altercations that may have happened on Thursday night, then get out now. Join Taryn and I on Sunday night for our next Big Brother episode recap. But why don't we start, Alex, with some of the bigger stories from overnight. From your perspective, what was the most important thing that happened on Thursday night into Friday in the Big Brother house?
Yeah, it's been a crazy night, but ultimately, the biggest thing, as you alluded to, is that some people have decided not to leave the status quo be as it is in respect to the house and Frank. A player like Tiffany is not necessarily going to just sit back and let things be, as it were. She kind of knows where some of the bodies are buried now that some of the votes went her way this week, and she's suddenly aware that the plan wasn't always to keep her. The plan was kind of came together pretty late. So I don't think she loves that idea, and she's crossing over. It looks like she may be making a proverbial deal with the devil, as everyone in the house is describing it, and aligning herself with Frank and Bridget, who are the pariahs now. Yeah,
Taryn, that you talked a lot about this week of a move that maybe Tiffany might have needed to make was to do Dan's funeral, to go and work with Frank when her back was against the wall. She never attempted that at the point when she was fighting to stay in the house when she was up on the block this week. But as the plan began to turn to maybe her going up on the block here during Paulie's HOH, that this ended up being now a possibility. So how did this all come to pass last night?
Well, basically, after Paulie wins HOH, he's immediately talking about how he wants to target Tiffany first. And he tells Frank this. And as this is happening, people are already shunning her yet again, like not talking to her, getting quiet when she enters the room. She's like, I'm not on the block anymore. Like, I just survived. Like, we just won an HOH. Like, what is going on here? And so she's feeling upset about this, and she cries. Nicole and Zakiya comfort her for a little while. Eventually, Frank walks in and is like, "Hey, like, what's going on?" And she tells him, like, "I just feel like everybody's turned on me." And Frank tells her, "Well, Paulie is gunning for you this week." And that was kind of just like the moment she was just like, "All right, screw it. I'm just going to tell you everything. I think we need to like have a chat. And they did. And they basically explained to each other that everything that had been going on, that it was Devon that had kind of turned them on each other, and that everybody had turned on Frank this week with this whole engineered split vote, and that he can't trust Nicole and Corey like he may have thought he could.
Yeah, this is really all pretty wild because we have Tiffany who ends up coming down off the block and everybody feels good about this plan. Oh, we got one over on Frank. And then by the end of the night, it really turns into a lot of people having buyer's remorse about potentially saving her. They're like, why did we save her? We should have sent her out and had Bronte here, who is not a threat. Alex, who are the biggest people in the buyer's remorse category?
First name that comes to mind for me was James, especially because I think James made maybe even the better point, which was we should have gotten Paul out. I think Paul, even more so than Bronte, was someone who was sitting on the block last week and has actually kind of put himself in a pretty good position now. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely certain people where it really made sense to, flip the script and keep Tiffany last week. And, maybe they didn't do as good a job of maintaining after they had flipped the script. Maybe, some people went into panic mode and, didn't do a good job of kind of keeping Tiffany calm. But, James is, one of these people. And I think, certainly Nicole and Corey are, very quick to, I think get into results-oriented logic, as I would describe it as well, and think about, immediately, like, this was something that, and Paulie said it as well, like, there's no way Frank would have tried as hard or gone as hard if he didn't know about this, which, I mean, I don't know. It was a true or false thing. I don't know how you can really,
beast
say he
mode.
was, beast moding it.
The heat has turned up, and now
the red tie,
yeah, the heat has turned up, and now I can remember harder,
Yeah, it's getting a little ridiculous in terms of there's a lot of narratives that are getting a bit absurd now, like the Tiffany Vanessa thing, like the legend of Frank. There's a few things that are getting spun around now where you're just like, really, dude? But all right, it's kind of driving a lot of thought process right now, a lot of fear and paranoia.
Taryn, could you speak to the emotional state of Tiffany at this hour? That I've read some reports overnight that she's talking about potentially self-evicting. Is that just talk, or is there some possibility that could happen?
It's just talk, I usually see emotional outbursts and breakdowns on this show, and I don't usually have a lot of sympathy for them. You're playing a game. You're supposed to be in this stressful environment. I genuinely did feel a little sympathy for Tiffany in this moment because she really hasn't done much wrong. A lot of this stuff that's being thrown at her is because of her sister. And, you have people like Paulie who now he's talking about how, this is exactly what Vanessa did. She bounced around. She didn't win comps until the end. It's like, no, that's not what Vanessa did. But she's turned into this crazy boogeyman. And there's
she's
nothing
like the Mike boogeyman.
Yeah.
She's like the boogie down Bronx man that could be coming back any minute.
Yes, Glenn will come back and save the day.
So many reasons to be afraid.
Yeah, but there's very little that she can do to avoid this, and she has been a very loyal member of her alliance, and they keep screwing her over time and time again, and she's just like, what do I have to do in this game? And so she found out all the stuff that's been going on, and she just broke down. She's like, this is too much for me. I don't like this game. It's not fun.
Yeah. Well, let's put a pin in the Tiffany part of this conversation because I think it really comes as part of a byproduct of some conversations that happened between Frank and Devon as well on Thursday night. Alex, could you set that up, the conversations that Frank and Devon got into on Thursday?
Yeah, so I mean, it all just kind of came to a head. I mean, they blew up a little bit. It was really just kind of the first fight of the season where it just kind of it began to escalate pretty quickly. You know what I mean? And it's like these, things are pretty obvious now where it's like everyone is trying to convince Frank that they didn't vote Bronte out, but there's certain people who really can't play that. You know what I mean? And I think there's a couple people even said, I think Michelle still even naively believes that Frank thinks she's on his side, where it's there's just a couple people that Frank has to assume in a 5-4 vote. All right, well, this person probably wasn't with me. You know what I mean? And the fact I think that Devon was maintaining the narrative. Like, I didn't, I voted Tiffany out. I don't care what you're saying. And then Frank, just started getting a little blunt with things. And then Devon, like, well, go ahead and put me up with roadkill then. You know what I mean? So it really just kind of, people just started kind of they like got rid of the mask a little bit and started like just, saying how they felt. And that's never great. But then, beyond that, you've got a lot going on with other people I mean, for me, especially with like Nicole being very afraid of like Tiffany and Frank and Devon simultaneously, and the possibility they could all talk to each other, because she's had conversations with each of them about getting out like the other two really throughout the course of this past week.
Well, it's something that happened with this big fight that happened right when the feeds came back on. Tiffany and Frank were kind of getting into it because he was upset that she was there, and she was upset that she was like, you were coming after me, and he was upset about the speech a little bit. And Devon got very, very nervous about that, because Devon, I think, kind of forgot that she was the impetus behind this like contentious relationship. Like, she was the one that told Frank that Tiffany was after her after getting it out of Tiffany, like drawing that statement out of Tiffany. And so I think Devon got very scared that this was all going to come out and get onto her, and it kind of did. And so she got very angry in that moment, and she yelled at Frank, trying to deflect the blame. But ultimately, she does get that blame on her, and I think that's a large part of why she is upset with Tiffany now, just because Tiffany had those secrets, and now those secrets are out, and she kind of blames Tiffany for it. And that's why Devon is on this buyer's remorse thing, where she's just like, oh, why didn't I just get rid of her? When all she really had to do was, treat her better after the vote, right? Like, be like, hey, Tiffany, I'm still on your side. Like, don't worry about it. Let's not say anything. But unfortunately, all this information gets out, and now Day's in a tough spot with Frank again.
And it really, I mean, it was pretty clear in certain moments to Tiffany, like, wow, Devon and Zakiya are, not treating me the way, an ally would treat me right now in this position. Like, it really hit home for her. You know what I mean? So there was certain things they definitely could have done better. Like, it's not Tiffany overreacting the way it's really being described on the feeds right now, in my opinion.
So, Taryn, does any of this new information change up what Paulie wants to do with the nominations?
No, if anything, it further solidified what he wanted to do. He's very, very, very focused on Tiffany and this Vanessa thing. He doesn't even talk about Tiffany anymore. He literally talks about Vanessa. Anytime he talks about targeting Tiffany, he talks about Vanessa instead of Tiffany. He's like laser focused on it, and I'm really not fond of it for his game. I really don't like the fact that he won this HOH. Brent was saying he couldn't blame Paulie for taking this HOH. Like, that's absurd. Paulie had 4 questions to throw this HOH. He had no business waiting until Frank was gone. He's not in danger if Frank wins HOH. And if Frank wins HOH, Frank can take the heat for taking out Tiffany or Devon instead of him. But now he's in this position, and he has to target Tiffany. And because of that, she's going to be like, well, what are you doing? And she's going to tell all the information that he's been afraid that she's going to do this whole time. And this is exactly what's happening. So Paulie's just he's in his own little world right now, and he really needs to stop and smell the roses and just be like, hold on, what I need to stop talking about Vanessa for 2 seconds.
Hey, how are you supposed to smell the roses when there's delicious steak around?
This is a damn good steak.
Yeah. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say, my first thought with this, Paulie winning HOH again was Shelly from last season. Shelly won like 2 HOHs very early. Was actually in a really good position without HOH. You know what I mean? Won the first HOH and takes out Devon, who you could make the argument that Devon wasn't coming after Shelly. Wins HOH again and takes out Audrey, who you can't make the argument that Audrey was coming after Shelly. You know what I mean? It's like Shelly had no enemies, but she won HOH anyway. She takes out people that probably weren't targeting her and creates a target for herself by winning comps. And before you know it, people are like, well, there's not that many people left around, and Shelly's won a lot of competitions. And I think that's the danger Paulie sees himself in right now. He could be on that track.
Okay,
I think that's a really, really great comparison, actually, because as you said, Shelly won HOH and targeted Audrey, who was perceived as this like paranoid, crazy player. And to some extent she was, but she was right in everything that she was paranoid about. And she was on Shelly's side, and she was trying to warn her about Vanessa. And in this scenario, Tiffany is that player where Paulie thinks that she's this crazy paranoid player and that she's coming after him, but she's not in any way, or she hasn't been until he's been actively targeting her. And so I really think it's a very similar mistake. So yeah. Good comparison.
I think a
Thank you, sir.
particularly delicious scenario, maybe not as delicious as that steak, could be if now that Tiffany is aligned with Frank and Paulie is making Tiffany into that great white whale. We've heard Paulie talk for quite some time that he wants to target Frank, and I don't believe that Frank has ever been made aware of that information. Could this potentially end up being the first shot fired in a war of Paulie versus Frank, Alex?
It's interesting. I mean, Tiffany definitely told Frank last night. Tiffany threw a lot of information at Frank last night. One of the big pieces, at least to me, that seemed to hit home was that, Corey and Paulie, as recently as last night, were telling me they're ready to come at you. And, Frank came away from that conversation and went and talked to Bridget, and he's like, boy, we're in trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he realized, I think the Corey and Paulie information was what really drove home. And I think he thought, even if there was a chance they voted against him, I think he thought he still had Nicole and Corey. And I think the conversation with Tiffany made him realize, wow, even if they say they're with me, at best, Nicole and Corey are just going to, kind of float with the breeze, go where, the grass is greener. You know what I mean? And that's really not someone you can count on in this game. So I think that was a bit eye-opening for Frank. Whether or not it becomes a direct Frank versus Paulie thing, I don't know. I still think the big element is, Frank versus Davon, and Tiffany is now trying to unite the two kind of in a very similar way to kind of what she did with Frank, where it's the big targets should come together. Otherwise, everyone else is just going to watch us take each other out, and it's just going to benefit them. I just don't know if that's something Davon could get behind, even if she felt like it benefited her game. I think, Frank has just rubbed her too raw at this point. I don't think there's any way that she would see herself reconciling that difference and working with him, even if she thought it was the right move for her.
Now, Taryn, while I feel as though Tiffany joining up with Frank will certainly provide good TV this week, which is always what we want, supposedly, Taryn, so does this help Tiffany stay in the house at all this week? I feel like that if people are coming after Tiffany, isn't aligning herself with Frank going to make her into an even bigger target that is really going to make people more laser focused on getting her out? Because the problem with this week was, how do you hurt Frank? There's nobody that is aligned with Frank that you could potentially take out. And now here's Tiffany sitting there who, if she's going to be part of Frank's group, she's very much in danger, right?
Yeah, that's very true. She moves from being targeted to being targeted somewhat even more to some extent. However, they were planning on getting rid of her regardless. So she really has nothing to lose at this point. They were talking about how we made a huge mistake keeping her last time. We're not going to let her Vanessa us. We don't even want to hear talk about oh, she's going after Frank. She's a number. She's just gone this week. No questions asked. She needed to win the veto to stay alive, probably this week anyway. Now she has somebody in Frank who might use the veto on her, so that is some benefit.
Interesting.
Yeah. However, she has kind of after she made this thing with Frank, she blew up at Nicole and Davon and treated them very passive aggressively, and then freaked out at them, said I'm a free agent. That's no good either, if she wants to somehow get votes. But really at this point she's gone 3 weeks on the block, or she will be 3 weeks on the block, and she's just been progressively getting more and more of a target on her back. So anything she can do to shake up the status quo at this point is probably going to benefit her in some way.
And then you also have to factor in, still a roadkill to be played. Frank has won 2 out of 3 of those. You align with yourself with that guy. He nominates somebody else. You never know. I mean, maybe you can collaborate on something that, is very beneficial for you, that is a favorable, person for you to be sitting next to come eviction night, even if you're still there.
Yeah, that's the right way to play this is to play it quietly, to go to Frank very quietly and not when emotions are high, and not make it obvious that this happened, because then you have Frank on your side, maybe willing to use the veto on you, and you still have other people not completely, thinking, oh, she's on Frank's side now, or whatever it is that they're going to be thinking. Then you can have maybe Frank put up somebody quietly like Davon that they can flip the votes on, because Frank does want Davon out ahead of Tiffany regardless. So if she hadn't been quite so loud and boisterous about it, she would be in a better spot. But as I said, anything that shakes up the status quo is going to be somewhat beneficial.
And then, Alex, one more thing. I always want to know, where does Nicole land on all of this? Because she is the person who I feel really feels like that she's sort of like the nucleus of a lot of what's going on in the house. And you have to feel like that she's can't be thrilled with these developments, but is she freaking out?
Oh, she's freaking out, Rob. Yeah, no, for me,
Oh
Nicole
my gosh.
For me, Nicole is going to land like wherever, at least, you know, from my perspective so far in this game, Nicole is going to land wherever the ground is driest. You know what I mean? Like, she doesn't seem to, she's very loyal to Corey at this point. And, you know, there's a lot of different variables of Final Five arrangements that involve Nicole, Corey, Paulie, Zakiya, and blank. You know what I mean? The showmance is +1. Like, there's a lot of that circulating. But, you know, beyond that, she's, you know, she's willing to turn on anyone, I think. And, you know, that's good in the game, to be honest. The problem is, like, if these people start to talk and you're not good at keeping your stories straight or, you know, staring them down under pressure, because, you know, people like Devon can read you pretty well. You know what I mean? So if Nicole's going to play the Andy Herron game, which can be effective, she needs to be able to, you know, sell it.
Okay. All right, let's take a couple of questions real quick from our viewers watching us on Facebook Live. This is a question that comes to us from Krish, who says, could Corey go up for roadkill? Do you see a scenario where that happens, Taryn? Does anybody want Corey out?
Yeah, Frank mentioned that he wanted to put Corey up when he was talking to Tiffany. He did change again and go back to nominating Devon instead if that happened. So it probably would be Devon if there was if Frank won, and if anybody else won, I don't see them putting up Corey necessarily. But it's certainly, he's still one of those names that's floating out there as like maybe this time, maybe next time. So it wouldn't surprise me if it happened.
And it's interesting how it's a name that comes from all sides of the house. You know what I mean? You've got Devon and Frank who don't agree on anything in the same room together. In separate rooms, both, you know, are down to get rid of Corey for the same reason, really, in that they feel like it'll bring Nicole back closer to them.
Okay. So this is from Jayan, who wants to say, who is the best bet for Tiffany to stay in as far as a roadkill nominee in this scenario if she wins roadkill? If Frank wins roadkill, I guess even if Bridget wins roadkill, Alex, is it Devon?
It's definitely a big target. I think Devon is, yeah, I mean, is probably as good a choice as any. I think, you know, you could also make the argument for Corey potentially simply because of, you know, he's a physical threat. You can't make that argument with Devon. You know, couple the fact that he's so closely at this point attached to a returning player in Nicole. So there's a lot. I think you could go either way and make the case pretty well.
Taryn, at this point, what would you say is the main alliance in the house? What's the most powerful grouping?
It's the showmances, Nicole and Corey, Paulie and Zakiya. They are pretty tight, and they are definitely running the house right now.
Okay. The showmances plus anybody plus James, or
yeah,
you counting
James
and Natalie?
James and Natalie are not part of that, but James is an add-on to that, as is Michelle, as is Devon to some extent. They're all like little one-piece add-ons that are not necessarily part of the core.
Okay. All right. And Ang Lee wants to say, no one is talking about Big Mish. Is she in the best position? Alex, what's your takeaway from the new breakout star of Big Brother 18, Big Mish?
She's in a pretty good spot. You know, yeah, like Taryn just talked about, the showmance grouping is definitely, you know, interested, open in having Michelle be their fifth. You know what I mean? She's one of the names that they're most comfortable about, and that's, you know, where you want to be. You want the people making decisions to feel that way about you. I guess, like, her danger lies in the fact that, you know, she thinks, I think still, that Frank is naive and believes her when she says that she voted out Tiffany. And Frank, like, definitely, I mean, Michelle was like one of the first names he was positive about. You know what I mean? So
right.
She might have a bit of a blind spot in regards to how much her team trusts her. I think
no, that's a bad look. I really feel like that's something that could potentially really blow up in her face, just how far she's taking this lie, where it's just like, okay, just lie. And if somebody calls you out on it, I think the move is to cop to it as opposed to double and triple and quadruple down on this lie, which really, I mean, who even cares?
I think she was one of the people that was going to have A, the hardest time selling it, and then B, probably oversold it the most, in that like she was like storming around, like stormed past Frank to go to the bathroom and stuff. And it's like, this is usually the person that's like trying the hardest is probably the liar. You know what I mean?
To her benefit, though, everybody is lying as well. Like nobody has copped to it yet. And now that Frank knows that everybody was in on it, I don't think she's going to be singled out in particular. Like he's not going to trust her a lot moving forward, but he doesn't trust anyone moving forward. So I don't think it's a huge detriment to her game at the moment.
And again, right, as you said, like if he's going to be after everyone, why is Michelle going to be your first target? She's certainly not the person you look at as being the one to win a competition and come back at you. So.
Okay.
And something Michelle has done really well is that conversation that she had with Corey that was part of flipping the vote to keep Tiffany has really stuck with Corey, and he really feels like Michelle is in his back pocket, which is just fantastic because every time she gets brought up, Corey's just like, oh, don't worry, she'll do whatever I want. And that's a great place to be, especially when Corey is in a power position.
Okay. Alex, give us one thing this weekend as we start to preview the next couple days on the feeds that you are most looking forward to seeing.
I'm interested to see this, the unholy alliance of Tiffany and Frank. I want to see kind of how this plays out, see, if they're able to gain any steam, see who wins the roadkill, especially because that could really shake up a power dynamic in the house. In the past, we've seen Frank win the roadkill and tell everybody. I don't think he'd be as inclined to do that this week. So, yeah, I mean, the roadkill could be a little bit different this week. It could be interesting.
Taryn, you've been a vocal critic of the roadkill so far this season. Do you feel like the roadkill is adding any intrigue this weekend?
It certainly could. This is definitely a week where we could see a lot of things flip just because it's so in flux. And I think that if somebody like Frank wins veto or roadkill and puts up somebody like Devon or takes down Tiffany, that's going to be pretty fantastic TV. I tweeted like Frank's story in Big Brother is that he either dies a villain or he lives long enough to see himself become the underdog hero. And I think that's sort of what we're starting to see. If he wins veto and takes Tiffany down, that's going to be a pretty huge moment. And even I'm going to be cheering for it. So
well said.
Yeah, that's going to cause a lot of chaos. Paulie's going to want Natalie out, but are they really going to pull the trigger on Natalie, or are they going to take a shot at somebody like Devon or Corey? That's going to be the interesting thing moving forward this week, if she can have the veto used on her.
Yeah, I don't think that the roadkill is terrible. I think that the teams is probably the thing that you would complain about more when we get to doing these off-season podcasts, ranking the terrible Big Brother twists. I feel like that roadkill potentially could have some intrigue. All right, so thank you guys both very much for joining us here live, and I do appreciate everybody who is watching the live version or the archived video of it. I know we had some tech issues with our first shot at this, so thanks for bearing with us. Always appreciate it. We will be back. Myself and Taryn will be streaming live again on Sunday night when we talk about what happens with the roadkill and the nominees that Paulie ultimately decides coming up live on Sunday night at 9:15 p.m. Eastern time. So looking forward to that. Also, I am going to be out in a little bit. I'm going to be, for those of you guys who watch the Screen Junkies Plus, I'm going to be filming another episode of TV Fights over on Screen Junkies Plus if you want to check that out. So looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say in the comments, as always. And also, we always appreciate the feedback on these shows that we do, just sort of these impromptu things on how we could get even better with that. So thanks so much, Alex and Taryn. We'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.